Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor. I'm Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to tonight's lecture, which is part of the Labour, Literature and Landmark Lecture Series. We are pleased to present this talk in partnership with the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and I would like to express our appreciation to them for their help and support. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1785, 235 years ago, by the skilled craftsmen of the City of New York. Today, our organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life of people of the City of New York through our educational and cultural programs. These include our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the John M. Mossman Lock Museum, and our lecture series, which was first started in 1837, and of which, of course, tonight's talk is part of. And I want to make a special mention of our General Society Library, because believe it or not, it will celebrate 200 years tomorrow, Wednesday the 25th. So in Wednesday, November 25th, 1820, a group of General Society members formed the General Society Library to assist the apprentices of New York City. So I'm so glad we had an opportunity to mention this publicly, and of course, the celebrations for that 200 years will be postponed to a future time. I would also like to express our appreciation to Barbara Lee Diamondstein, Spiegel Vogel, and the NY Landmarks 55 Alliance. They featured our speaker tonight, Tim Fryatt, at the September meeting, where he gave this wonderful presentation on the Battery Maritime Building. And Tim has been kind enough to agree to give a longer version of this talk this evening. Just before I introduce Tim, I just want to mention one thing. During the lecture, there'll be an opportunity to submit typewritten questions through the Q&A section, and we ask that you use that section to submit questions. And at the end of the talk, we'll answer as many of these questions as we can in our Q&A session, which will be about 10 or 15 minutes in length. Tim Fryatt, AIA, is director at Marvel Architects with 22 years of experience leading complex projects in a wide range of scales and sectors. Known as a prolific designer and a creative catalyst, he is dedicated to developing meaningful places that leverage latent value, behave naturally, and inspire delight. Presently, Mr. Fryatt is lead architect overseeing 1 million square feet of development across 3 boroughs of New York City. A registered architect and a member of the Maplewood, New Jersey Township Planning Board, Tim Fryatt's work has been widely awarded, published, and exhibited, including in the New York Times and the Museum of Modern Art. It is now my huge pleasure to introduce to you Tim Fryatt. Thank you so much, Tim.
Well, thank you, Karen, for that introduction. And I'd like to also thank Victoria Dengel for the opportunity, Angelo Vigorito for his support, and everybody at the General Society. And a special thanks to Barbara Lee Diamondstein Spiegel Vogel for her support. I'm going to walk you tonight through the full history of the Battery Maritime Building, which is really a story of the New York City Waterfront and civic infrastructure and landmarks. Saving the B&B is really a tale of caution, but it has a happy ending, and all in the audience will well understand the importance of preserving our built heritage, the significance in our lives, and culture of ensuring meaningful architecture is passed down to future generations intact. The built environment really is our direct link to the past and reminds us to look towards the future. So it's been my distinct honor to, along with my team here at Marvel Architects, to be working on the Battery Maritime Building for the last 13 years now. It's been an odyssey, and I'm going to try to go through all of the highlights tonight. And I'd like to posit that our architectural landmarks cannot survive without a creative, adaptive reuse, collaborative partnerships, and of course a healthy dose of dogged persistence. So I'm going to walk through. First, it is really a story of the New York City waterfront and its long transition from industrial to recreational use. The B&B sits at the foot of Broadway at the southern tip of Manhattan, directly adjacent to the Staten Island Ferry. So I'm going to walk through a little history next to help contextualize the building and the place. And plus, who doesn't love old black and white drawings and photos? I know I do. New York City is an archipelago of islands. New York City has 520 miles of coastline, which is more than Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, and Boston combined. It's really a city born of the water. The center of commerce was always the edge of the city. This wonderful view of New York Harbor from 1883 shows our site seated right at the foot of Broadway. We all know Manhattan was settled from the southern tip up, so really it's the front door to the city. And I'd like to just point out in this view that there's ships of all sizes and uses, not just commerce, but transportation. And in addition, ferries. It was really an ideal mode of transportation in this water city, especially in areas not served by mass transit. Note the Brooklyn Bridge, the only bridge crossing the East River at that time, plays a role in the B&B later on. Zooming in a bit, we see the Battery Maritime Building site. And I have a quote from Herbert Halberg, who was an LPC commissioner who designated the building in 1966. From the city's founding, the lower tip of Manhattan has always been a focal point for ferry activity. And that's played a vital role in New York City's growth and development. So the Battery Maritime Building was not the first ferry building to occupy this prominent site. You might say New York's first site. In 1904, there were 147 ferry boats in operation in the waters around New York City. And the tremendous turn of the century boom, growth, fueled by invention, industry, and ambition. So many of the city's greatest landmarks were built during this period, and among them, the B&B. So it was a time of great investment in civic transportation infrastructure. You see here the many bridges that occurred around the same time. The Battery Maritime Building was built in 1909, Pennsylvania Station in 1910, and Grand Central in 1913. So just to measure the magnitude of the Battery Maritime Building's importance, I like to imagine for a moment, if you would, that Grand Central Station has been dormant for 50 years, unused, falling apart, and was set to reopen. That is what we have at the Battery Maritime Building. But I'm getting a little ahead of the story. In 1905, the municipal ferry system was established. And there's a great book by Brian J. Kudale, I might be mispronouncing his name, who authored Over and Back, the History of Ferry Boats in the New York City Harbor. And he referred to this time frame as a progressive takeover of the ferry system. So the city acquired the Staten Island ferry route, along with many others, and it began to build ferry terminals all over the city. Notice here that 2 levels on the ferry boat. This plays into the B&B's design that we'll get to in a little bit. And here it is. It was originally called the Municipal Ferry Terminal. And there were 7 slips altogether. The architect was Walker and Morris. This was their proposal in 1906. The Municipal Ferry Terminal is one of those straightforward but grandiose titles, just like Grand Central. And it's really the only name that it needed with such a breadth, an impressive character. A massive 7-slip complex, the largest of the kind in America. And it was wonderfully detailed, as you'll see. But it was never fully executed. You know, a grand vision by talented visionary architects on behalf of an ambitious and powerful city, growing city, but it was never fully realized. The slips 1 and 2 were built. The Whitehall building, which was operating the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, and then slips 5, 6, and 7, which later became or was renamed the Battery Maritime Building. The middle was never built. So looking at this diagrams, you have to understand first that B&B is just a fragment of the original intent. And because of that, the west facade in particular was always temporary, meant to connect. This is the view of the Great Hall under construction. It was built between 1907 and 1909 by the Department of Docks and Ferries, who later became the Department of Docks and then the Department of Marine and Aviation. And then finally today, the ferry operations are run by DOT and EDC. I'm just going to walk very quickly through some plans. There's very few original drawings that remain. In fact, if you look close, these are actually plumbing plans. The ground floor is really a machine for loading ferries. Horses and automobiles eventually entered slips 5 and 7 and could travel underneath the building to access 6. And then people entered at the ground level and went up into the second floor, which is really the grand civic space for people. The light gray in the middle is the Great Hall, which was the only heated space on the second floor, and just for ticketed passengers. The concourse, the donut that surrounds it, was unheated, and it was disconnected at the ends to separate the ticketed and non-ticketed passengers. Passengers boarded the ferries at the second level on those gangplank bridges that you saw earlier. So here's the section, the city side to the right, the harbor side to the left, and it's really a brilliant concept to bring the public up to the second floor. The other thing I want to point out here is the rooftop recreation pavilion, which was, at the time, the idea of fresh maritime air and health was a new promise, and this was a public space where people were invited to take in the views and the fresh air. So here it is, built 1912. You see B&B in the foreground, and then there's that gap, that middle that was never built, and the Whitehall terminal in the background. Imagine the bustling, street front activity here, the horses, the freight, the commuters. It just must have been full of life and activity. Also notice there's a generous pedestrian podium with graceful kind of cascading steps down to the street. Of course, as soon enough the cars began parking on that, as always is the story. And here's the first place where you see the western facade, which was like I said, always temporary. So you see it looks incomplete and undetailed compared to the grandiose 5-bayed loggia that you see here. Here's a view from the north, roughly above Broadway and Water Street, looking at the elevated L train, which was built in 1914 and connected people directly from the train onto that second floor loggia. So you could step right off, right into the ticketed zones and onto the ferry without going up or down steps. 1925 was really the pinnacle of the extensive New York City municipal ferry system. They had a dozen routes to all 5 boroughs in New Jersey. And another quote from the LPC designation report, Viewed from a ferry boat approaching the tip of Manhattan, the monumental arched openings of the Municipal Ferry Terminal at the mouth of the East River appear like 3 tunnels opening into the canyons of the city. I love that so much because these archways are really so gorgeous, and must have been a welcoming sight. Slips 1 and 2, the Whitehall terminal serves Staten Island, as I mentioned. Slips 5 and 6 and 7 originally served South Brooklyn. Sunset, I think mostly Sunset Park. I think there might have been something in Red Hook as well. But the black and white photos really don't do it justice. The building was gorgeously colored in various hues of green, yellow, blue tiles. A really remarkable structure, known, its style was called Beaux-Arts structural expressionism. You know, the architects used the structural rivets and trusses decoratively, with great originality and boldness. So you really do not see architecture like this anywhere. It's reminiscent, it's probably its closest relative is the French Exposition buildings of the 1989 fair, including the Eiffel Tower. So that, you know, its ornate embellishments are replete all around the building: scrolls, panels, rivets, cross bracing, brackets, rosettes, maritime themed features. Really remarkable details, Guastavino and painted tiles, really creative and unorthodox column capitals here. It's not quite sure if it's Corinthian or Doric. It's a style into its own. But even beyond the genius and execution of style, the B&B is graceful and delightful in a very human way. It elevated the daily experience of ferry riders entering the city. And I like to share a quote at this point from Ada Louise Huxtable, who we always have to turn to because she said it better than anyone. She wasn't referring to the B&B here, but she very well may have been when she so brilliantly said, "Today, when so much seems to conspire to reduce life and feeling to the most deprived and demeaning bottom line, it is more important than ever that we receive that extra dimension of dignity or delight and the elevated sense of self that the art of building can provide through the nature of places where we live and work. What counts more than style is whether architecture improves our experience of the built world, whether it makes us wonder why we were never noticed places like this quite this way before." So that's a wonderful quote for a wonderful building. But by the mid-20s, the age of ferries hit its peak and was in decline. The stock market, the 2 main factors here were the stock market crash and the Great Depression, and the growing dominancy of the automobile, you know, and its proportionate share of public dollars, you know, as seen in the efforts of Moses, of Robert Moses. So the closest example of that is right in front of the Battery Maritime Building, which is the Battery Park Underpass, a piece of automotive infrastructure that was completed in 1951 and effectively severed the B&B from the city fabric. I would also just point out in this image, there's a Coast Guard sign to the left. They began running the ferry to Governor's Island in 1966. And it still operates as the ferry terminal to Governor's Island. Through all this time, the building remained underutilized. You know, after the ferry service declined, you know, without active use, every building weathers and falls apart, especially metal buildings over the water, as you might imagine. You can notice also here the L train is gone now that the 1, 6, and R train tunnels had been built. In this view, you know, we see, because of the lack of maintenance, severe deterioration and loss of significant architectural features during a 1957 utilitarian 4th floor addition and alteration. The B&B is already weathering, turning green, and note Whitehall Ferry Terminal was experiencing the same and was clad rather than repaired. So without active ferry use, the BMB was used as several different things: a homeless shelter for a time, then just administrative and storage uses for the Department of Marine and Aviation, and then the Department of Transportation. But also during this period, the building was designated a individual landmark by LPC in 1966, the second year of its existence, and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1976. Nonetheless, by the 90s, the building was in critical condition. All its color gone, significant pieces literally falling into the water. The new century inspired a return to the waterfront. The city, city to the rescue. The EDC brought shop architects on board to do a master plan for the East River waterfront. The plan included a concept to correct that overzealous automobile infrastructure, which lit it over and moved the tunnel to the east. This is a project I posit is still valid and should be done someday. And then EDC engaged Jan Herb-Corney's office to perform an extensive restoration of the exterior envelope, including the roof. And they did a wonderful job directing the disassembly and reassembly of the complex facades, which are composed of intriguing composition of architectural metals, including cast iron, rolled steel, stamped zinc, and copper. With Jan Herb-Corney's skillful work, what did we do in the building? There was an excitement building, and in 2008, David Byrne even had a creative time installation called Play in the Building. This is in the Great Hall, where he literally hooked up a piano to the hammers and pipes and things around the building. So he was literally playing the building, which was really fun. But the building now had a new exterior renovation, but no uses on the inside, and it was still really rough. So they put out a RFP for a private developer to develop the building for new uses, and perform the work at their own cost. And then, which turns out to be a significantly larger investment than the exterior shell, and in return receives a long-term lease to operate the property. So a public-private partnership has been successful around the city. Marvel Architects, then Rogers Marvel Architects, working for the Dermott companies, helped secure and win this bid. And we got to work to answer the central question: how to reactivate the building, which needed a new economic engine to preserve the building into the future. So we got to work analyzing the building. The first thing to understand, the B&B is really two buildings. The five bay, two-story civic building facing South Street, and the 3-bay, four-story harbor building facing the water. Really distinct structures in many ways. The other thing to know is large areas of historic envelope were left unimproved from the exterior work, and these were opportunities for intervention. Still an active ferry building. Boarding only occurs at grade now, not on the second floor, but the Trust for Governor's Island operates slip 6 and 7, and a water taxi in slip 5, and it's a MARSAC level 1, so there's security concerns there. The interiors themselves were full of potential, clearly, but dark and frightening spaces, and more importantly, there was inadequate egress, infrastructure, fire protection, lighting, acoustic isolation, everything, challenging layouts, insufficient floor area. But you got up to the roof and there were incredible views, really unparalleled, and difficult to appreciate with the small windows on the 3rd and 4th floors. And remember, there was that history of rooftop recreation pavilion that was lost. So as the develop team was looking to capitalize on this and expand program opportunities, the first idea was to add a story to the water side of the building. And we had to be careful that was not visible and it had to be sensitively done. This is a program section. I'm just going to talk briefly about the the use. The present intended uses are all to be operated by Cipriani, the wonderful restaurateur and host of so many properties in the city that you know. They're operating all aspects. There's an event space on the second floor in the Civic building, and then a hotel on levels 3 and 4, and then a restaurant bar on the 5th floor. So 3, 4, and 5 are all in the Harbor building, and the event space in the Civic building. We were careful to ensure that these new uses all satisfied the Secretary of the Interior standards, which state a property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building, its site, and environment. The other thing to point out is that there have been 3 different developers and 3 contractors since the adaptive reuse construction began in 2011. So each had their own ideas about the uses, finishes, layouts, and execution. Each negotiated with the city. The current developer and final developer is Midtown Equities, who hired us and has shown a remarkable commitment and dedication to the property. So they deserve a lot of kudos for the investment that they've done. So to add the 5th story, we first had to look at the foundations, and that meant we waited for low tide, put on our hip waders, and jumped under the building. The entire building's over the water. Our longtime partners at Silman Structural Engineers performed an analysis, and we quickly learned that there's 200% more piles per square foot at the roof addition area. So it was an obvious place to put an addition. They performed a structural model to verify the additional capacity and determine the load pass. Typically, framing gets easier as you move up in a building, but in the Harbor building, it's reversed because the top floors are basically spanning those great arches. Then we had to develop a plan to provide safe egress pathways to the street, bringing in new stair and elevator codes and bringing it up to modern life safety needs. And that was a great challenge to needle these through the small amount of space between the arches and the great east-west girders that span them. And finally, there was the architectural and aesthetic concerns. You know, how do we responsibly add a story to the building, satisfying the stringent and complex historic standards that from SHPO, NPS, and LPC, to which we were legally and ethically obligated. We were, of course, struck by the bold celebratory skyline created by the cupolas and pergolas. But the B&B has lost its skyline profile over time as the city grew up behind it and the cupolas and pergolas were removed. So we proposed to reconstruct the 4th floor cupolas and pergolas, and then contrast with a minimal modern glass curtain wall on the 5th floor to reflect and basically restore the sky space. And we were fortunate that among the few drawings that we did have were the cupolas and pergolas, so we were able to faithfully reconstruct those details with modern materials and methods. You'll note throughout the presentation there's a number of different methods that we've used, from reconstruction and preservation and more, and restoration through the way. We also did proportion analysis, and delighted to find the golden section replete in the building, and what we call the rhythm analysis. You know, there's a certain kind of repetition and rhythm that happens in the building that contributes to its rich character, and we were careful that our new addition had enough sympathetic DNA that it felt that it belonged. And after a long and lengthy public process, the design ultimately achieved community support, agency approvals, including with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, who awarded us significant historic tax credits to help offset the construction costs of the project. And I think it works. This is the building today. The curtain wall does in fact reflect the sky. The cupolas and pergolas are really visually identical to the historic, and the bold arched forms are seen as in marked contrast to the other rectangular shapes of the building behind. And the horizontality of the building and the addition also helps the building really stand out from the harbor view. Rotating around the building, we now see the north and west facades. The west facade was an effort of restoration, retention of the materials from the most significant time frame, but we were allowed more reimagining there on how to recreate that. The north facade of the Civic Building was primarily an exercise in preservation, retaining and repairing the existing fabric. We did add a canopy and a sign at the main events lobby. The lobby had, with little remaining fabric, we relied on the drawings, what little we could glean from the drawings. We reinforced the steel. There was, during Sandy, the building was inundated with 3 feet of water. So we also hung a new historic stair, which was lost. Here it is complete, that ground floor entry to the events lobby. Now on the second floor of the Civic Building, we're in the North Concourse, the outer ring of the donut, the loggia to the left, the Great Hall to the right. Again, this was historically untreated space, and it was pretty roughly finished too. Obviously, over time, it was completely stripped. The important thing here was the steel. The code requires structural steel fireproofed with spray or expensive intumescent paint. But here our steel is both structural and decorative, so we performed an active preservation, ensuring the original design remained, a fire analysis to simulate a structural performance during a fire, which allowed us to, along with a creative sprinkler system, allowed us to, from our friends at EP Engineers, allowed us to convince DOB to permit us to leave much of the structural steel exposed. Because the building was over exterior space, we had to add radiant heat to the floors. This was the condition of many of the walls, which needed acoustic, AV wiring, complex. Many of the things we're proudest about you no longer see because we integrated them in rather unorthodox ways to make the building still read as it wanted to, as it did. So here's that finish wall. The windows and doors were really a mix of preservation and rehabilitation. And here's that larger North Concourse space as it appears today, with the Great Hall stair coming up it. Entering now into the Great Hall. Here's a 1910 view. It was heated. It had a concession booth, wood benches. Here it was in 2007. Plaster work remained, but the lay light was lost, doors lost, cast iron. We used a mixture of drawings. We did photo micrograph paint color investigations. We reconstructed the lay light from photos using modern safety glass and did multiple samples to test the effect and reinforce the steel. This is up on the catwalk looking closely at that lay light, which we believe is really successful and beautiful. And here's the Great Hall as it is today. The Civic Building effectively completed now and ready to reclaim its rightful place as the crown jewel of the New York City waterfront. The carpets and the lighting were by OTD, the Office of Thierry Despont, interior designers, and Schwinghammer Lighting. There's very few 9,000 square foot event spaces downtown. Before COVID happened, Cipriani was fortunate to hold several initial events, and they transformed the space each time with their great artistry and magic and dedication to gracious service to create these really magic environments. And each time the guests enter with a sense of awe that this building has been, unseen in plain sight for so long. I'm just going to step outside again briefly to look back at the Harbor Building. I'd like to just show a few more slides of where we are on the upper floors of the Harbor Building, the hotel, restaurant, and bar, which are not yet complete. The hotel rooms are coming along. The pergola and cupola from the fourth floor terraces also close to completion, and the fifth floor restaurant and bar space with its sweeping views of the harbor. So this is the conclusion of my presentation. Again, it's been a great joy to be a part of this building, which I love so much, and I hope that you all have an opportunity to visit and see the great treasure that we have restored for New York. This is the team. I would be missed not to mention the many people behind this long effort. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Karen for any questions.
Tim, that was just absolutely fantastic. It is such a gorgeous building, and the magnificent drawings you showed, both historic and contemporary, was like really wonderful. Anyway, you and everyone involved is much to be applauded. But we're now going to take some questions. So if you just give me 1 second. Now well, this is from Ronald Gold, and he's wondering if we can get a copy of the presentation. And it is being recorded, Mr. Gold, so that will be available, maybe not till next week, but with Tim's permission, this will be circulated to all attendees. Now this is from Rob Dawson, and he said, could you explain about the golden section? And you mentioned it, well, about 6:30. Goodness, do you know what he's referring to? The golden section?
Yes, there was the one diagram where we were studying the proportions of the building, which is, one of the ways that we always look to uncover the hidden order in buildings. And I always find there is magic in the golden section, that proportion of approximately 1 to 1.6 that is found throughout the building. And it was integrated into our addition as well. So there's something satisfying about the underlying order of a building when the proportions feel right. And the golden section has it's a long history, the Fibonacci series of mathematical perfection that you see in nature, and has been employed in all sorts of architectural projects throughout history. So we were delighted to find that it existed here at the B&B as well.
Great. Now this is from Mr. Klein, and he wonders about what, obviously, as you said, Cipriani are using this building in a really wonderful way. What kind of public access do you know will be available when the building is allowed once more to be open to the public?
Yeah, it's really a big question in these public-private partnerships. How much public access is retained? The second floor of the facility will be open at a certain hours and days of the week. I don't have that time schedule in front of me. And then there is a cafe space on the second floor mezzanine, which is open to the public all the time. So and of course, many events that will occur here will be public or semi-public in nature. Some are private events, weddings and the like, but the access to the upper floors. I think, you know, the hotels are open for people to rent rooms. The restaurant bar is, I believe, also going to be open. There may be some club aspect to it with some membership. So this is it's an important public conversation, you know, it's an important conversation to have about what are the trade-offs in these public-private partnerships. I happen to feel that the arrangement that the city made on behalf of preserving this building's legacy was a good one, and the use here is wholly appropriate for the building. And so there will be lots of opportunities for public engagement with the building. And the ground floor is always continuously open to the public for ferry access.
Fantastic. And I'm sure we all, you know, long for the day that we are actually going to be able to see it in person. This may tie somewhat into your last answer, but why was, this is from John Lawson, why was the NPS involved in this NYC project?
Because the building is listed as on the National Register as a landmark property, and because the developer chose to seek historic tax credits, we were obligated to present the design to the State Historic Preservation Office, who ultimately then refers us to the National Park Service, who carefully reviews the project against the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So along with the, you know, to achieve the tax credits, ultimately we were obligated to those federal standards, and they helped make a better building. I'll point out that prior to seeking those tax credits, there was a taller addition. We have 5 stories now. We had a 7-story building that sought and achieved approval from New York City landmarks in 2010. So in going for the historic credit tax credits, the building got smaller, and I think really it was a better move. So.
Oh, well, that's interesting. This is from Ellen Burns. This might be an impossible question to answer at the moment, but when is the estimated opening date for the hotel and restaurant?
Yes, well, we're scheduled to be complete with construction this year, and as always, at the end of most construction projects, we're racing to get there. When it opens, I think has not been determined because of COVID-19. So hopefully, you know, if things go well, it'll be first quarter next year.
Right, this is an interesting question. This is from one of our attendees. What encouragement can you provide to others seeking environmental approvals, permits for work at the NYC waterfront, not necessarily on landmark buildings?
It is tricky. There are, you know, working over the water involves DEC and DEP and other agencies that, you know, are intended to ensure that the waterways are protected and that we're no longer contributing to the, you know, pollution of our waterways. It's a lengthy process. You know, my only advice is to, you know, follow the codes and not try to, you know, start early, lean on your technical consultants, and, you know, engage the agencies right away. Any building project, but especially historic adaptive reuse projects, are collaborative in nature and involve a lot of people. At the B&B, because it was such a lengthy process, we were able to get people in very early and satisfy a lot of those environmental agency approvals.
This is from Gregory Dietrichs. Did you receive any pushback from the National Park Service for the scale of proposed rooftop addition?
Yes, yes, indeed. They only permit a single-story addition, and you'll notice that the fourth floor was only, well, what was there when we proposed an addition above that was actually not original to the building, right? That fourth story addition, although there was a recreational pavilion there, came in the 50s. And so there was some, first we had to get over that hurdle that the fourth floor exists and it's appropriate and can withstand another story. I think it was compelling to them that this concept of replacing the sky, and without that fifth floor, it would not exist, and the cupolas would be lost visually in the skyline. But even once we got past that hurdle, we had a taller fifth floor that they insisted we reduce in height by, I think it was 3 feet. So it was important that it felt to be the right proportions and not top heavy. And that when you're standing across the street, you see you really don't see the addition at all above the mansard, as you might have caught in one of the sections that showed that sight line. So there was a kind of regulating height limit there that ultimately satisfied NPS and SHPO.
Thank you. Why were the old architectural drawings entitled 39th Street Ferry Terminal?
Yes, we had a similar question. The best, we don't have an answer, first of all. The drawings were found in the building and they were in terrible condition. By all measures, they were describing the Battery Maritime Building. They showed South Street, they showed the exact location. It's unclear why they were mistitled. There were plans at the time for another facility, and it could be that the architects were working on both and just titled the whole project for the other facility. I don't really have a clear answer. I wish that more drawings had survived so we could get to the bottom of that one, but it's a mystery.
Well, yeah, well.
It's a historic mystery.
Mysteries are always now, we continue to have a few questions, and probably because they've come after you answered the question, but is there anything more you want to say about the completion date and being open to the public? And if you feel like you've covered that fully, then that's fine. I just thought, as we have a few more questions relating to that.
It's really COVID related at this point. As soon as there's already occupancy for the municipal building, so that's going to open as soon as it's safe. And the upper stories on the harbor building, like I said, should be complete this year. So it's really dependent upon COVID safety at this point.
Right, thank you. This is from Beth Goff. She wondered, were you involved in any way with the ticketing boarding areas around Governor's Island?
Yes, we have been coordinating with the Governor's Island folks because we're doing a lot of work in the slips. And we also were hired separately to assist in the renovation of their lobby space and waiting area space. It's a challenge because, they're like a tenant at this point. They've been occupying the building for many years, and which was dormant. And now they have another use, which is putting a lot of strain on the ground floor. You can imagine when there's an event of 1,000+ people, how many cars and vehicles and deliveries and trucks will be on the ground level. And they have a lot of traffic going out to Governor's Island. So it's been a real challenge to work out the logistics with the Governor's Island team, but we've preserved their access and operational clearances. So hopefully everything's going fine so far. I hope. And
From that, absolutely.
yes, it is their only access, ferry access. So, and I mean, obviously, it's just such an important space. We were very careful to help preserve their functionality.
Right. And I hope you mind, we still have quite a few more questions, and because it's, I believe.
I'm here. That's great. They're very interesting questions.
I'll try and answer as many of these questions. I mean, address many of the questions as possible. This is from Stephen Gorecki, and this I wonder if your answer you're going to say is related to COVID, but he wonders, he works downtown and it seemed like construction stopped for a while, or has it been going on continuously?
Well, I don't know if the questioner means this year or just over the last decade, but I'll take that as the latter. The first developer who and contractor who began in 2011, that work over time, and I'll just say in full disclosure that they after we had designed the building and gained approvals from the historic and all regulating agencies, another architect was awarded the job to construct it, and with the Dermott team. And after 3 or 4 years of construction, around I'd say 2015, they began defaulting on their construction loans, as I understand it, and that's what led ultimately for them to exchange the project, sell the project to another developer. So, and in that period, there was probably construction halted for 1 or 2 years. And so this is why, it's been a real odyssey for this wonderful building. The city made this investment on the exterior to entice private developers to come in and finish the job and reactivate it. But then I think that first team just kind of underestimated the complexity of working within such a complicated historic fabric, and ultimately, for whatever reasons, they pass it off to another developer, and then so time was lost. Then there were redesigns, things lost along the way. So all that is a part of the really, I see now as a really triumphant story that it's persevered. The city persevered. Enough effort and love has gone into this building now over the years that it's it's wonderful that it's now that I'm here talking to you about it after so many years being engaged on the project. We came back on board in the last few years with the newest developer, MEQS, to Midtown Equities, to finish the all the remaining work, and there was a significant amount. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, well, it's so good that it's a happy ending. This is from someone who chooses to remain anonymous, and wow, great job, and I can only echo that. As a former Staten Islander, I've admired this building for decades. Was the old Whitehall building still intact inside the newer Whitehall Ferry Terminal, lost in the ferry terminal fire?
I don't know the history of the Whitehall Terminal's demise. It was intact and serving the Staten Island ferries into the 90s, well into the 90s. And I believe the new building was built in the late 90s, early O's, and it's really a shame. I don't think it really served the size of the new the newer Staten Island ferries very well ever. So I don't know that it was a preservation issue or an operational issue, or a fire. So I'm sorry, I don't have a factual answer for you, but if BMB is the is the happy ending, it's really a hard loss that Whitehall no longer is with us. So
this is from Deirdre Hamill, and perhaps this was partly covered in the slide where you indicated your partners, but she's wondering what organizations and individuals were involved with the restoration and how was the project spearheaded?
Yes, we had many different all sorts of consultants, from acoustics to AV, IT, or historic preservation consultants I should have mentioned earlier. Higgins Quaisbarth Associates was instrumental in really helping us understand the building and move the design in a way that was appropriate to its its identity and help us seek the approvals. Marvel Architects has been the design team lead as long as we've been involved, and we choreograph the various consultants to produce the designs. And so that's gross simplification, but all I could say is it's been a real team effort on the design side, and there's also been a number of public and private organizations that have supported, including the Landmarks Conservancy, who spoke in favor of the project with Landmarks. There was a period where we were doing a lot of public outreach and talking to see what people would like to see here and what would be appropriate. So we're inclusive in our process always, and we're especially so here on such an important property. I think because of the duration, some of that gets lost in time when different players come into agencies over time and don't know the history. But we were very inclusive in the process, and I think the finished product, the finished spaces and building attest to that.
The next is not so much a question as it's a comment and some possibly interesting information for you, and it's from David Henley. He writes, much of the original drawings for the buildings may have been consigned in the early 90s to the former Department of Business Services, which inherited the Department of Port and Trade's waterfront building responsibilities. And he says he knows someone who was involved in the transfer of the documents, and if it's something that you're interested in, he can put you in contact with this person.
I would absolutely love to be in touch with you, and you can contact me through the Marvel Architects website. And yeah, we're not historians, which is why I don't have all the historic research. And we're not researchers, although we do what we can and we do try. I'd love to learn more and find more if they exist. So yes, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Right. The next question is from John Carson, and he congratulates you on your talk. Now, he wonders, apart from the obvious delay factors, has the pandemic influenced any kind of program change? Or has it made everyone think twice of, I'm thinking it's like air circulation and things like that. Have those things kind of arisen in the last 6 months?
Certainly. We have already had oversized the fresh air intake. So there's operable windows in many locations and wonderful connections to outdoor spaces, both on the civic and harbor side. it was too late to affect the layouts, which were, well underway and near completion. So, it's really, we were already following best practices in terms of, hypoallergenic materials and air quality and non-off-gassing materials. And so all that kind of environmental considerations that go into designing a healthy, first building have been employed here. And that's tricky to do in a historic property where you have a lot of existing conditions and finishes. Any hazardous materials were remediated a long time ago. But in terms of the operations, Cipriani, they excel at service. That's really their gift and art. And they are employing many wonderful kind of features in terms of compelling spacing and how people queue, like managing crowds in such a way that they can facilitate gatherings once it's appropriate. But at this point, it's just small groups coming in.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Are there any other buildings in New York City that reflect a similar design language and might possibly be from the same architect?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. When you look up Walker and Morris, there's not a lot that pops up. I know they did the Fuller building, which is you'll give me a moment. I'll tell you where that's at. So I don't know a lot about the architects themselves. What other buildings they were able to produce. The Fuller building's at 41 East 57th at Madison Avenue. And it's more of an Art Deco building, and it was like, a decade and a half later. So I'm not really sure what else they produced, but which is surprising for a building of such great originality and execution. In terms of other buildings with a similar style, there's none that I know of. I'm sure somebody in this audience can think of examples more than I can right now, but I'm sure there's things that might be not wholly dissimilar, but using such a variety of metals, cast, stamped, riveted. It's just a very rare thing. We don't construct buildings this way anymore. And really, after the 1900s and 1910s, we didn't either. So that anything that would be close to this would be of that time frame. And there aren't too many there's none that I can think of that really are similar.
Right. Okay, so it's 7 o'clock now, but if you're willing, Tim, we'll still take a few more questions.
I am overjoyed to talk about the Battery Maritime Building. We've been working quietly for so many years, and it's just really just the beginning of us, sharing the building. So I'm very grateful to be here and excited to answer the questions. Please proceed.
Okay. Will the maritime operations, this is from Gordon Cooper, continue to be managed by the DOT?
In slip 5, I think it's a C streak. So that's I think they're overseen by DOT, but it's actually a privately run ferry service that goes somewhere on the Jersey shore. I think south a little bit. There's no plan for them to discontinue or add to that service right now. There was the gangplank. There's these great bridges that lift up and down, and gallows with huge operable wheels that permit those bridges to lift up and down for with the tides to meet the ferries at the appropriate spot. Those are no longer functional in slip 5. So, and rather than repair them, they built a kind of temporary dock that you can go out there and use today if you're taking that ferry. That permits a wide variety of vessels to use that dock. It's not I sort of wish they had actually restored the historic, but in the end, it's made it more functional. Those are to remain in slip 5. Slip 6 and 7 are wholly controlled by the Trust for Governors Island, and there's no plan to change that either.
Right. Was the building permitted through NYC DOB or
Yes.
Department of Small Business Services?
From
Mark Stockley, sorry.
The building was filed and permitted through the Department of Buildings.
Right. This is a wonderful New York question. Did you add any additional noise mitigation to deal with the helicopter traffic from Sean Stowe?
With the helicopter traffic?
Yes.
They say, yeah, that's a great question. From this, from somebody that very well knows the site, I imagine, and the helicopter noise that occurs. There is a helicopter pad directly to our east. There were measures that were undertaken. Not the most, let's just say it's very difficult to prevent the noise both from the ferry horns and the helicopters without massively thick and expensive glass assemblies. You can do it with a solid wall, but so it's what we were able to achieve for an SDC rating on the 3rd floor was much higher than we did on the 4th floor. And that just comes down to a balance between cost and performance. So somebody in the 4th floor that's a little more glassy in those hotel rooms, or the 5th floor in the restaurant, they're going to hear those helicopters. Not like you're outdoors. They're still going to be significantly diminished. And we did use acoustic rated IGU assemblies in the glazing, but it's not rocket proof. It's that noise will be there, and we sort of joke that it'll be a part of the New York maritime experience.
Yes. This is a comment from John Lawson, and Mr. Fryatt and his associates should be tremendously proud of this project. We all thank you. And really, if we had a live audience, I think there would be thunderous applause, because this is just the most incredible project.
That's very kind.
Well, absolutely, deservedly so. Oh, and this is from Michael Lerman, and this is an interesting question. Were there any other interesting or unexpected artifactual or historical findings during the reconstruction of the building?
Yeah, that's a great question, because architects like to scurry about and see what we can find and dig into all the dirty, dark corners of buildings and see what pieces are left. In this case, they mostly were gone by the time we arrived, because of the work that had already been done by EDC and the Jan Pokorny team, and Tishman Construction, who I should mention, Charlie Silverman in particular, just lived in the building, and they found some pieces. There was a mural of the harbor, which I believe is still in the building, and some stone pieces, a lot of metal castings, and just a few fragments, glass fragments from, we don't know if it was from a window or from the ley light. So not a lot of stuff was really left for us to find beyond those. In having talked to the Jan Pokorny team, there wasn't a lot before that prior. The building had served as offices and storage for so long that anything valuable or interesting, had walked, let's say, already. So not a lot of stuff, but we find the clues that we can, and we use them to try to piece it together. More than the coffee table artifact, we're really using the clues to try to understand better how to advance our historic restoration work. But not a lot of interesting stuff was found.
Right. Can you speak to the structure of the building? I was told the building rests on piles and not a foundation. How did that
Correct.
affect the project as opposed to having a more usual foundation?
Well, yeah, the piles, there are piles, and then there's concrete pile caps that cluster certain groups of those piles. It's true, the entire building is built beyond the bulkhead line, which is the seawall, if you will. And the piles were all existing. To have achieved the 7-story building that we had originally planned would have required additional piles be driven and new pile caps, and that would have been terribly complex and challenging, but not impossible. As it was, a part of reducing that height prevented that marine engineering necessity, which was a huge cost. So that was really good news for us. I will say that because we did add a story and all sorts of weight in the building with the fit out, we are sort of pushing the limits of those piles and the pile caps. It's obviously they tend to be the piles tend to keep over time, and there was a thorough study done. You saw the photo with the Langen team investigating on the underwater structures, and we determined they were all in good condition, and so that's the foundation is all on piles. Not so unusual. The structure of the building itself is mostly steel and some cast iron, and there were some places of significant deterioration where we had to replace structural members, and certainly a number of cases where we were adding or revising framing in order to facilitate the fit out. And that was not done with any of the heavy members, obviously, that span those arches, or the trusses that span the Great Hall or the concourses. But certainly there was some steel work and quite a bit of steel work involved.
Right. Now the next question, this is something you have already addressed him in some way. It's really about the mixture of private and public funding, and this is from Mark Bench, and you've explained certain areas will be accessible to the public, but he wonders who will advocate for the public to have access to this fantastic building.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a contract between EDC, who's the city owns the building and will continue to own the building, and so EDC basically holds the ground lease contract with the developer, who has the rights to operate the building. But the city is an active partner, and any changes over the years, any needs, any other deterioration is something that is negotiated, or any access issues for the public, which to the questioner's point, is something that is negotiated. It's outlined in the contract, and if it's not clear, then it's negotiated at the time. So I think the simple answer is EDC is serving as effectively the landlord of the building and the advocate for the public. That said, I think this is New York, is a strong community, organized community. You know, it's the, you know, in the more of these public-private partnerships that we see, they've been very successful in so many places. The better I think the city and the public are getting at understanding them and advocating on behalf of the city. So it's, I think it's improving, and I think there's areas for improvement here too. But it's you know, it's something that we all should be participating in and advocating for our government to be pushing to get the best deal possible for the people.
Of course, of course. We're going to take the final two questions of the night, Tim. Michael Lerman wonders, is the mural being preserved?
Yeah, yes, it is. It's significantly deteriorated, I should say already. So it's not only faded, but it's you know, crumbling. It's on a plaster substrate, so it's a real it's a challenge to relocate it. And actually, I haven't seen it in a while, so I've made a note to check in on that mural to see where it will be at. Absolutely, it will be preserved and hopefully displayed somewhere in the building where it belongs. And there are other features and remnants, like historic gates on the ground floor in the slip areas that, you know, we've reinstalled some of them, but there's still more to be done. So the work continues, and you know, we've always been strong advocates that anything that's found on site that can be reused, we try to reuse, even if it can't be for the original purpose. We find ways to incorporate it and expose it for public enjoyment. So absolutely, we'll continue to do the same for the mural.
Our final question of the night, and it relates back to the mystery of the 39 street designation. The questioner wonders, is it possible that the 39th street designation on some of the drawings refers to the 39 Street Ferry Terminal in Brooklyn, with which the BMB was connected?
Smart. I think that's very much possible. I tell you, it's something I'm embarrassed I don't have the answer. I'm gonna be looking into it with the Higgins Quasbar team to see if we can't determine it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, well, there we are. We perhaps solved a mystery. So thank you to that anonymous attendee.
Yes, indeed.
Tim,
And thank you for all these wonderful questions.
Well, our wonderful audience, and I want to thank all of you for attending tonight. But most of all, I want to thank you, Tim, because your enthusiasm for the project, the magnificence of the project, your eloquence, it really was an unforgettable lecture. And thank you so much for sparing your valuable time to talk about the project. And I know we absolutely all look forward to the time that we're going to be able to go down and visit this really wonderful building. And I just have to say again that you and your colleagues have done the most magnificent job on the restoration of this building. And it truly is a New York gem. So thank you.
Yes, it is indeed.
And as I said, Tim, I wish we hear the applause that you deserve, but thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thank you to our audience again. And really, as Tim said, those were like terrific questions. I do just want to mention 2 of our upcoming talks, and they will be on next Tuesday, and it's on a very different topic. Inside paragraphs, typographic fundamentals. And then on, and that's with, I should say, with Cyrus Highsmith from Rhode Island School of Design. And on Tuesday, December 15th, we're going to have a talk with John Toranax, who some of you may be familiar with, on mapping the subway. So again, Tim, huge thanks for participating here tonight and really for what your wonderful lecture. And we look forward to seeing our audience at future events. And of course, a very happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I know it's a slightly different Thanksgiving, but I hope you all have a very enjoyable one. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you again. I'll say good night now. Good night.
Good night.